Welcome to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy, where Sunday's sermon sparks Wednesday's conversation. Each week, they sit down to dive deeper, reflect thoughtfully, and wrestle with the themes of this week's message. Their goal is to explore faith more fully, ask the hard questions, and invite you into a dialogue that goes beyond the pulpit.
Welcome into the podcast, everyone. I'm Pastor Randy Moore.
And I'm Pastor Andy Payton.
Good to sit down with you, Pastor Andy. And as I was walking in this morning, we always do a soul check-in, and I paused and I thought for a moment, and I said, I know. Lisa and I are going to get our 8th grandchild. Between this podcast's recording and next weekend's podcast recording, we'll have our 8th grandchild. So
awesome.
So that's a blessing. That's good to have lots of grandchildren around and see them come up.
You've spent a lot of time with your grandchildren this summer too.
Yeah.
It's been fun when I'm going past your house onto our house, towards our house. I always see you out there fishing you're fishing, and then the grandchildren are kind of running around the pond.
Right. I tell them, here's the number one lesson to learn in fishing. Don't let your line get tangled up, because if you get in the habit of your line getting tangled up, fishing is going to be about nothing more than untangling your line. And so if you're helping little children fish, your main job is to make sure
you're not fishing any longer.
You're not fishing any longer, and you're just making sure that they can spend more time with their bait in the water than on the shore.
You want to increase their odds so they don't get bored and walk away. Yes.
Yeah, but kids just love fishing. I had sort of forgotten my own love for fishing. My dad took my brothers and I fishing a lot. He was in the Ken Bar Bass Club. I mean, he was a serious bass fisherman.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, but as I got older, I sort of moved away from it. But I mean, kids just are naturally drawn to it for some reason.
There's one little boy in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Most days when I'm going home, he's out there fishing. Sometimes he's got his line in the tree and stuff like that. And every once in a while, I'll stop and try to help him out. But my girls think I'm crazy because we'll go fishing and I'll say something like, "I don't even care if I catch anything or not."
Right.
And they're like, "What? That's the point of fishing, is to catch fish, right, Dad?" And I was, well, for some people, for other people, it's just a time of, being outside and being with nature. And
absolutely. Yeah. And not to go down this road too far, but I was thinking about barbless hooks this week, because sometimes getting the fish off the hook can be something that's not all that pleasant.
Yeah.
Because it's catch and release, right? And we're not really there to take in the fish and to kill the fish and eat the fish, but we don't want to kill them. And so there probably are barbless hooks, which will probably reduce your success rate, but it might be a little bit better on the.
I'm at the point now. I've gone to Tractor Supply. I've bought my fish food.
Yeah,
and so I have a McDonald's cup. I will walk down about once every evening, maybe every other evening, where I'll just walk down and feed the ducks and feed the fish. And there's some big catfish that will come up. Oh. I like that just as much, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Watching them come up,
just like vacuum cleaners, And then the ducks are there now, and so they're going, and then the catfish and the ducks are competing, and it's fun.
3 houses ago, I had a koi pond, and that was fun.
They get big.
Yeah. Okay, that's probably enough.
We probably should talk about what we're here to talk about. Yeah.
And we're not, even though we're going to talk about Jesus, we're not talking about fishing. We're talking about bread today.
Yes, that was the lesson we were using, the lectionary lesson this last Sunday, and Jesus' most famous miracle, I would say, short of Easter itself. And then this story, the story of the multiplying the loaves and the fish, appears in all 4 Gospels, which I just find that to be fascinating, because people don't realize it, but the 3 Gospels, what we call the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, they're kind of similar in some ways. They use the same framework, but then John is very different. But this story is the one that kind of carries over between the Synoptics and the Gospel writer John. And I feel like in it, we are given a picture, really, I think, what is central to being a follower of Christ.
Well, let's read it. So it's, as you said, it's from Matthew and the 14th chapter, starting with the 13th verse. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full, and those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And this wasn't part of your message, but I thought about this as I was reading just then. This sounds an awful lot like the Lord's Supper. It sounds a lot like
there's some echoes for
communion.
Sure. Echoes of the Lord's Supper, and then there's also echoes of Moses too.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a little bit of both in there for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, when he gives thanks and blesses the bread and breaks it, that certainly echoes what we would call Holy Communion. Yeah.
Yeah. And so your message, though, and we always try to narrow in on a message because we could go into several directions here, was, what is it that we're going to do with what God gives us? What is it that we're going to do with what Christ gives us, what he entrusts to us?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the basic point of the story. Jesus invites the disciples to take what food they have, and then the disciples are called to share it with others. As they share it, it multiplies. And so really we find a symbol, a metaphor really of what we're all called to do as Christ followers. But there's a lot more going on in this story than just that, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have the Jesus vision of the world in this story, but then there's another vision of the world that's kind of there, and you will miss it if you don't dial into it. And that's that line where it says, "And after Jesus heard this,"
mm-hmm.
and what it's referring to is Herod Antipas had just executed John the Baptist right before this miracle occurs.
At a meal.
Yeah. It's two very different meals. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
And then in the sermon, I tried to paint a picture of the Herods. Really, it's a whole family, Herod the Great was the king that tried to kill baby Jesus early on in the Gospel of Matthew. And then Herod Antipas is the not really a king technically. He is a ruler who ends up executing John the Baptist. And they were a ruthless family. I mean, you did not cross the Herods and live for very long, basically, in the first century context. Herod the Great was famous for just the way he would just mow people over in terms of making sure that he was in power and control. And then he was relentless in his pursuit of his own legacy as well. In the sermon, I used a picture of a place that they called Herodium, which was like a palace and a fortress that Herod built. And he called it, he named it after himself, which is kind of the person he was. And then
right.
Herod Antipas, though, that's really more the Herod that you're dealing with in the Gospels. I mean, you get the stories of Jesus in terms of his birth, but the Herod that we hear about in the Gospels is more Herod Antipas. That's the son of King Herod the Great. And Herod Antipas, a couple of just historical things about him I didn't dive into, but he was the ruler of the area where Jesus and the disciples did most of their ministry. So Galilee is a section in northern Israel, and so Herod Antipas was over that, appointed there by the Romans, and he actually moved the capital of that region from Sepphoris to Tiberias. And Tiberias, the city Tiberias, was a city that was on the Sea of Galilee. He named it after the emperor. So this is a guy that's trying to get known, by the emperor of Rome. And then he also, he commercializes the fishing industry on the Sea of Galilee. And so these fishermen overnight, through Herod, went from fishing for themselves and their family to having to fish for the empire and pay taxes to the empire. And along comes Jesus, and he calls fishermen to become fishers of men. And I just find all that to be very interesting in terms of a backdrop, that what drove it, that's kind of the behind the scenes, that what drives the gospel. Here you have this Roman way of of power and greed and wealth. And then you have Jesus inviting people into what he calls the kingdom of God. And these two visions of power, they don't always they don't always merge very well.
Well, in one of my sermons a few weeks ago, I talked about there's the Pharaoh way, or the Pharaoh worldview, and then there's God's worldview.
Right.
And here there's Herod's worldview, and there's God's worldview. And it is a lens, you talked about it, it is a lens through which to look at what was going on in the first century and the effect that empire had on it. This isn't a perfect analogy, but it would be like a mom and pop store here today getting gobbled up by a large corporate entity.
Yeah.
But even worse than that, that could actually turn out for the best for mom and pop. Not always, but it didn't turn out for the best for the fishermen, who were businessmen, very small businessmen, but they had their own business.
Right. And it was taken from them, basically. I mean, they were allowed to do it still. I'm sure they had to pay a tax to fish, and then they had to pay a tax on the fish they caught, all that kind of thing, because the Herods of the world, they needed to finance their building projects, and so that's where a lot of that money was going. And so if you couldn't pay up, then sometimes you'd actually become a slave too and lose your freedom altogether. These are the folks that Jesus is mostly speaking to. And these are not the elites. They're the peasants of the world that Jesus is speaking to, and inviting people to see their own value, but also Jesus is inviting folks to see their own agency as well. I think that's one of the beautiful things of the gospel, is the gospel is so revolutionary in the sense that, in a sense, you could say that Jesus believes in the people and their capacity to change the world, and not be stuck in this way of living.
I want to back up to something that, as I read this, not in this moment, but when I was at home for lunch and read this, and again, this wasn't part of your message, but I'd like to get your comment on it. We can miss sometimes if we don't slow down. So, and you did mention this, and I know you did in your sermon, and I think you did just a moment ago, that this follows the execution of John the Baptist. Yeah, you did mention it because we talked about the meal. And so Jesus really needed to get away. So John the Baptist, probably his cousin, his forerunner, his mentor, I mean, he's brutally murdered. He's brutally executed. Well, what would you do if one of your close associates, got arrested, or So he's like, part of it is he's maybe escaping momentarily from the same thing, or he needs to get away and process it. But the thing that's wonderful is, even at that, when he was confronted with people in need, he was still compassionate.
Yes, 100%. He was hospitable.
Yeah,
to them.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's a striking moment. I'm so glad you pointed it out, because in this we find really a reflection of Jesus' humanity. He's distraught. I would think he's afraid. He's grieving. He goes away. It says after he heard this about John being executed, he went off to a deserted place, and to be alone. When it says in the Gospels he goes off to a deserted place, basically that's code for he's spending time with God, and he goes and prays. And then after he goes to shore, then it just takes off from there. The crowds are following him, that kind of thing. But
and there's a lesson not only for pastors, but for anyone who calls himself a follower of Christ, is that we have to be very, very careful that when people come to us in need, that we have time for them no matter what's going on. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but boy, it does set forth a challenge for us. And I think it's why it is important for us to get away and to always have our reserves, be filled up, so that we can have the energy and the spirit to respond to that. But it's just not a good look if we're looking at our watch when someone comes.
I know.
You know what I mean?
Well, no, and I've been there, right?
Yeah,
Like where I'm
yeah.
not able to truly be present with someone
Right.
because I've got too many things spinning in the background.
Yeah.
The idea that comes to my mind is like within ministry or even all of life, we get our doing outdoes our being. Our doing for Christ outdoes our being with Christ. And when that happens, that's a recipe for disaster in terms of the spiritual journey and in terms of what we have to offer folks. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, so he does go off and pray in a deserted place. A better translation of that, by the way, is wilderness, which if
It's another callback.
I mean, totally. Now we're pulling from the Hebrew Bible, where the Israelites are on their way from Egypt to the Promised Land, and they go into the wilderness. And I love the metaphor of the wilderness being the place where God feeds us, and that's what Jesus is doing there. He's being fed by God, really spiritually in this sense. And so yeah, he starts with prayer, and then he practices hospitality. But then the miracle comes where it's evening and the people are hungry, and the disciples are like, they're hungry. And the line that really sticks out to me is like Jesus says to the disciples, you give them something to eat. Jesus isn't the one that feeds them. The disciples are the ones that they end up feeding him. And we see here that Jesus sees the disciples as an extension really of himself. And when they see a need and a problem, Jesus basically says, you're called to respond to that need, and you're called to respond to that problem. I would venture to say the real miracle here is they take what little food that they have and they share it. And when they share it, much like the rest of the miracles you see in the Gospels, when they act on behalf of what Jesus had just told them, the miracle begins to take place. And so
I heard someone describe God as the one who calls us forward. It's not that we are a product of our past and that our future is predetermined, because of our past. It's that, no, there's God always calling us forward. And that's what, to me, is going on here. God is calling those disciples forward. Christ is calling them forward to do what he could do.
Right.
And what he's motivating anyway, and the source of our strength to do it comes from him. But he's calling us forward for our own growth and for our own realization of who we truly can be.
Well, and it goes back to your sermon where you said, does God need us?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. I mean, God created us to be image bearers, and there's going to be things that happen because we do them. There's going to be things that don't happen because we don't do them. And if the disciples, in the moment in which Jesus commands them to share their bread, if the disciples say, no, I'm good, I keep it for myself, no miracle. I mean, they'll be fed, I guess, but the transformation is not going to happen. So,
yeah. And I think sometimes, not that we're looking for a reward, we shouldn't be. And even if there are rewards, sometimes they're not realized until, way on down the road. But I tell you what, there is a multiplication. When we're in a moment when we can recognize that we have, despite what we would really want to do, we go ahead and step forward and, we're obedient to that, then I think a lot of times we can really appreciate the multiplying effect that Christ has on what we're doing.
Well, and it's back to this theme that we've talked about a lot within the podcast, Randy, where when we're moving with a love that's already there is a fulfillment in that because we're leaning into who we've been created to be. And by the way, that's the key to understanding the miracle stories in the Gospels. The miracle stories are really, to use Augustine here, this is the way Augustine would talk about it, they are an acceleration of what God's always doing in the world. So God's always creating enough bread for people to eat. God's always maintaining the process by which water turns into wine. God's always seeking to heal people that are sick through the processes within our body. God's always doing these things. And what the miracles, if you look at them closely, they're an acceleration of what God's already doing. And what the disciples end up doing in this moment is they become an agent of the miraculous because they are now working along with what God is already working to do in the world. And And so we often, I think, get lost in just thinking about the fact that, 5,000 people were miraculously fed. And that's wonderful. I'm not trying to discount that. But we miss the bigger point that they're trying to make, that God's already providing all of this. And we are not invited to be agents of that, in this case, feeding of the hungry people. And
one of the things I thought about as you were speaking on Sunday morning was I started thinking about sometimes we're afraid that there's not going to be enough, and we can become greedy with our resources and greedy with our things and greedy with our money. But there really is enough.
Oh, yeah.
And there's enough bread. There's enough bread to feed the world, but not all the world gets fed.
Right. I mean, that's one of the glaring issues we have as Americans, is we consume a huge percentage of the world's resources, based upon our population versus what we consume. It's just so out of balance in terms of what the rest of the world ends up getting. And it's just not a very positive picture. Yeah. There's the four components. So there's prayer. Jesus goes away to pray. Then he shows hospitality to the people. Then he puts the disciples to work. And it's all done within the context of a community. Just a quick thing about this. This becomes the basis. These four movements become the basis for the Christian monastic movement that we find developing later on, after the Gospels are written, after the Bible is written. In about the 5th, 6th century, really, is when Christian monasticism begins to take off. And that's something that we as Protestants don't know a lot about, because we are only 500 years old in terms of the Christian tradition.
Takes a while.
Monasticism goes back 15, 16, 1700 years ago. And specifically in the sermon I mentioned St. Benedict. And Benedict went to Rome, interestingly enough, just after it had fallen. And so the world of Herod and Rome ends up crumbling. Benedict shows up to Rome, right after it had all fallen apart, and he's shocked by what he sees. And what he begins to do then is he starts to live out the gospel, which, I mean, preaching the gospel, really, all it requires us to be willing to do is to practice the better in the midst of the bad, right? Like, and just be that example. That's what Benedict does. He prays. And the way he prays is he sets certain times of the day apart for the monks to gather and remember God. And so just think about that for a moment. In a world of chaos, everything's falling apart. What Benedict does, the first thing he begins to do is he orders the lives of the people who are interested in a better way. And the way that they do that is they remember God. And I would venture to say, like, as Christians, there's something for us in that too. Like, throughout the day, it's so important for us to make time to remember God. I mean, on just a baseline level, it would be like in the morning, around noon, maybe before you go to bed. I mean, that's the pattern.
That's religion in the best sense.
Yeah,
really.
You just remember God, man.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And so from that prayer, then the Benedictine order would practice hospitality. Anyone was welcome to the monasteries. And then they also worked, which was a countercultural thing for that time. In the Roman world, the noblemen, they would not do manual labor. The monks would. And then they always did it within the context of a community as well, which is ultimately what God calls us to, is to live in holy relationship with one another. So, I mean, there's so much in that, in terms of just people are wondering, what can we do when there's so much that seems wrong with the world? Well, the monastic tradition does give us a picture and a path for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to look back on that history, and we've talked about how complicated these things can be, and it does take a little bit of time to appreciate that. But, once we get there, it just opens up for us in that way.
Yeah. Well, when you start taking what you've been given and you orient it toward Christ, to God, then your life becomes fuller, it becomes bigger. That's what the story is trying to point us to in our lesson for today. You got this Herod way of just, what's in it for me, my consumption, I want the world to bow down to me. If they don't listen to me, off with their head, that kind of behavior. in the sermon, I even said, don't point fingers at the world around, look inward. I mean,
he said, there's a little Herod in all of us,
There's a
or
little
Pharaoh
Herod.
in all of us.
Yeah.
And in most of us, and you'd have to ask the question whether we are functioning today as Herod people or Pharaoh people or God's people.
Right. And one of the number one ways to know if you're listening to the voice of Pharaoh or Herod is one of the big ways is you're working 24/7.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big one, right? Like the Israelites are in bondage in Egypt. They're enslaved in Egypt. What are they doing there? They're working 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll just let people fill in the blank in terms of our westernized society today. What are we doing today as a westernized society? We don't shut down.
Plus a side hustle.
Yeah. We have our regular job, we have our other job, and it's always more. And that's the Sabbath, by the way. I mean, when the Israelites get to the promised land, they're commanded to take a Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
The Sabbath is there to keep them from becoming Egypt again.
Mm-hmm.
The Sabbath is there to remind them of God's goodness and work happening despite them. And then, I mean, I don't know how well we do at that sometimes as pastors. How well do we do at that?
Yeah.
I mean, Sunday morning is not always a worship experience for us. Let's just be honest.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes me think about what we discussed a little bit last time was that we get rather critical of the law, but the 10 Commandments are essentially instruction to say, hey, people, if you don't want to go back into bondage, why don't you try this plan?
Yes. It's the alternative. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is how you live in line with God's love. Through obedience, you find the freedom you're looking for. And the commands are not burdensome. So,
Yeah. So there's plenty. We have received plenty from God. If we just have the courage and the faith to trust that.
Yeah. And what I tried to do in my second sermon was end it in a way where I wanted people to realize I'm not asking you to add a bunch of things to your life. Just take the gifts you've been given already, orient them towards Christ and what Christ would have you to do with those gifts. Our lives will multiply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's all that God's really asking us to do. Jesus does not ask the disciples to share bread they don't have.
Right.
He just invites them to share the bread they do have. And that's a symbol for us all.
Yeah.
So.
Is it John who has the little boy who has the fish and the loaves? I think it is. In the Gospel of John, because that's one of the variations. Remember, there's the little.
Yes. I don't know. I didn't look that up.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point, though, isn't it? Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, you called this sort of a bridge message because we're going to start a new sermon series this coming Sunday.
Yeah. The next series is we're going to continue to use the lectionary, but we've cultivated a theme. We're calling it the next faithful step, and essentially, what we're going to be talking about is what do we do when our dreams come crashing down? Mm-hmm. What do we do when life doesn't go as planned? How do we take that next faithful step in the midst of that? Because it's going to happen to us all. And I think the scriptures have a lot to say about how we can navigate life's uncertainty. We're also going to have our combined service 10 a.m. where we have all these dreams about the year ahead of time. And the connection I'm going to try and make, Randy, is so what happens when the dream doesn't quite come together the way you thought it was going to? What do we do then? And we're going to talk about the story of Joseph where he gets thrown into the pit. And that story is just layers upon layer of meaning. That's what's wonderful about the Hebrew Bible and in the gospel stories too. They're just, if you just scratch the surface and you just see the story for what it says and you don't go any deeper, you're really missing the point. Mm-hmm. And the applications are almost endless when we get into some of these kinds of stories like Joseph and Moses and of course Jesus. So
very good. I'm looking forward to that.
Be fun. Yep.
All right, Pastor Andy, always good to be with you. Good to be with you as well. Thanks for finding our podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Spread the word. I think what we're trying to do here is offer some good news right here once a week for you. So thank you for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. We hope you'll join us next week. We see Christ in you.